Thanks for tuning in to the Just Go Play podcast, where we look to develop and promote a positive youth sports experience. As always, we are available for speaking and private engagements and can be reached at info@justgoplay.ca. You can also catch full video versions of our podcast on our YouTube channel. And don't forget to visit us at justgoplay.ca. Enjoy the episode. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Just Go Play podcast. I'm your host, Daryl Devonish, also known as Coach D. Today, honest to God, we have an amazing guest with us. We have author of QBQ, The Question Behind the Question, Flipping the Switch, Outstanding, 47 Ways to Make Your Organization Exceptional, co-author of Raising Accountable Kids, QQQ Workbook, and publisher of I Own It for Youth. I got to say right off the bat, John, I've gotten so much from your book, the QBQ. It's changed the way I talk, the way I move, the way I operate, the way I do business. And
thank you, Daryl.
My co-host, Matt, I'll let him speak to it too. He's the one who introduced me to this book. And I can't thank him enough, because I tell people, this is the book. I don't care if you don't read, this is the one you got to read. Matt,
or listen to on audio.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Matt?
Yeah, thanks, Daryl. And John, welcome to the podcast. We're super excited to have you on, and we're really thankful for your book. A little backstory is that we owned a personal training business, which, as you know, is all about accountability in the physical fitness realm. And one of our mainstays was the QBQ book. So when we found it early, just after you'd authored it way back in 2001, it became an integral piece of our onboarding for all of our training coaches. In fact, in our weekly one-on-one meetings, we read the book together for an hour in all of our meetings with every single coach that we had. So by the time we were finished our business after 2 decades, it's quite a few trainers at over 250 a year, and they really got a lot out of it. It was a really great book. It was a really great message. So we want to start off by just starting with you and saying, what exactly is QBQ, and how'd you come up with the idea?
I just got lucky. But what do they say? Better lucky than good? There I was, Minneapolis, Minnesota, hired to sell training in 1986. I was almost 28. And I started calling on managers, leaders, executives, HR people selling training for another gentleman who had created a different course. And I did that for 10 years, Daryl and Matt, and I got pretty good at it, found my niche. I'm a natural born salesperson, and I enjoyed facilitating training, and I started listening. It took a while, but I finally figured out, as I conducted about 10,000 hours of management training sessions over a decade, I started hearing people ask really lousy questions like, when am I going to find good people? And when will that department do its job right? And who made the mistake? And why doesn't somebody improve this place? And why do we have to go through all this change? When is someone going to train me? And one day in 1994, I went to a client group, St. Jude Medical in Little Canada, Minnesota, a suburb of St. Paul. And one of the richest, most successful firms in America. They were a client of mine using my mentor's training. And I said, let me teach an idea to a group. And I taught this idea where we turned the question around. Instead of asking, why do we have to go through all this change? Let's ask, how can I adapt to the changing world? Instead of asking, when will that department do its job right? Let's ask, how can I be my best today? And I talked about tying it to creating a life of personal accountability. And very quickly, it became known as the question behind the question, the QBQ. And I went back a few months later, and I was sitting with the VP of HR, VP of operations, and they were discussing some organizational problem. And one of them all of a sudden said to the other, hey, we need to ask the question behind the question. And I remember thinking, wow, they remembered it. It stuck with them. And if you know much about the training business, and you folks are experts, about 98% of what is taught in the training world is never used. It's not remembered. It's not applied. It's not turned into action. It's just stuff. But this QBQ thing stuck with my client. And so within a year, I left my mentor, went off on my own, started teaching personal accountability in the QBQ. And a few years later, I was doing a State Farm meeting. in Virginia. And one of the people ran up to me and said, "Oh my gosh, you've got to put this into a book." So I wrote a book called Personal Accountability. That was the title. Powerful and practical ideas for you and your organization. Well, it was 300 pages, gents, 300 pages. And about a year later, the Who Moved My Cheese phenomenon hit. And everybody wanted a book they could read in 12 seconds. And I fought it for a while, but finally I said, we've got to downsize Personal Accountability, the big book, to a smaller book. So we extracted the QBQ methodology from the original book, came up with the first version of this book. This is the 5th edition. It's brand new. And then the book took off. We had sold 50,000 of the other book, which is a success in the self-publishing business. But then we sold 300,000 of the QBQ book. And then Penguin Random House decided to come over and buy it from us. And we said, fine, you can have it. And turned out they had also published Who Moved My Cheese. But that's when it took off. And now it's a book that takes about an hour to read. And quite honestly, I get some nice emails from people that say it's changed their life. So thank you for your endorsement.
Yeah, I bet. And listen, I'm just going to ask another question before Daryl hops in. John, accountability, it's a scary word for a lot of people. Some people don't know what it's about. In the book QBQ, you say there are myths around accountability. Can you tell us about some of those myths and what they are?
Well, what I discovered selling as a speaker, I'm a speaker, we have a training business, of course, and all that. And we teach really one thing, personal accountability. People would be confused and they needed our message because they had bought into some lies or some myths of accountability. One was, we think it's a group thing. I mean, you guys are in the training business too. So I think I'm a little older though. And so since I've been in the business in 1986, how much team building has been done for corporations around the world, and it didn't make a difference. People came back from rafting on the river and said, hey, we got wet together. Now we can work together. But nothing really changed because it didn't reach the individual. So what happened, there's a lot of myths or oxymorons like accountability groups, group accountability, team accountability. People started hiding behind the team, or the team didn't get it done. And when we came along with QBQ, people realized, oh, wait a minute, it's not about the team. Now, don't take that wrong. Your listeners, your viewers should not take that wrong. Teams are important, but teams are based on individuals. And so when the individual pauses and says, what can I do today to support the team? How can I be my best today? Then the team stands on strong pillars. The team has a foundation. So we want to make sure that we're not thinking accountability is a group thing. It is very much a personal me thing. It's for John Miller. And the second myth around accountability is we think it's something that I do to others. One of the greatest examples I have is when we came out with the Raising Accountable Kids book. We sent out an email to 1,000 people who had signed up for a list. We said, hey, the book's ready. Well, we got back emails from parents that said, oh, thank you, John and Karen. Finally, a book I can use to make my 12-year-old do his homework. A book I can use to make my teenage daughter speak to me respectfully. A book I can use to get my millennial son out in the workforce and off the couch. Well, my wife and I have always laughed. These people that thought the book was for the kids, what did they do when they got to page 2? And on page 2, we make this incredibly contrarian statement. We say, my child is a product of my parenting, period. It's not the government, it's not the church, it's not the sports leaders, it's not the coaches, it's not the schools, it's not the friends, it's not the neighbors, it's not Uncle Joe. My child is a product of my parenting. So personal accountability is not something we do to others. It's something I use as a mom or a dad. And in the business world, I developed this concept by listening to managers over the years basically say, I'm going to call my people in on Tuesday. We're going to have a really tough meeting, and I'm going to hold them accountable. Well, we say in the QBQ book, humility is the cornerstone of leadership, and there's no humility in holding others accountable. Now, don't get me wrong. If you're a manager, you do need to set standards. You do need to hold people accountable. You do need to confront. Sometimes you need to terminate. But the QBQ is not about that. The QBQ is about me applying personal accountability in my life. So it's not a group thing, and it's not something I do to others. Those are the two myths.
Yeah, brilliant. And one of the things that we've always had a conversation about is when we hear, oh, everyone else is an idiot. If you're saying everyone else is an idiot, you got to really take a long look in the mirror, because if you're managing them, you got to take ownership over that.
Wait a minute. Is that a Canadian term? Because you're not allowed to say that down here anymore in the States, you know.
Yeah, well, I'm a little bit old. I'm an old soul in a young body. So yeah, I say it. Daryl, I know you've got lots of questions. Go.
I do. So I want to ask, why is personal accountability such an imperative for both organizations and individuals?
Well, it's kind of simple. The foundation of everything else is me taking ownership for my life. I mean, what would be the opposite of that? What would be the antithesis? There's a big word for you. The antithesis of accountability would be blaming my family of origin, blaming my parents, blaming my employer, blaming my spouse, whining about life not being fair, becoming entitled and saying I deserve. Everything opposite of personal accountability causes me to fail. The more I blame, the more I point fingers, the more I play victim, the more I whine and complain, the less apt I am to reach goals, the less apt I am to succeed. You know, I was a wrestler, and I can prove it because I have what we call retro headgear here, okay? Right out of the 70s, guys. Now, one thing I learned on the mat is it's all about me. Couldn't blame the team, couldn't blame the coach, couldn't blame the ref, had to say, what could I have done better tonight in my match? How could I take ownership for this meet, this match, this competition today? What can I do to learn and grow from this experience? So personal accountability is imperative, Daryl, because without it, there's no basis. I'm standing on quicksand. I'm in a quagmire. I'm going to sink into the 3 traps in the QBQ book we talk about. Victim, blame, procrastinate. When I can eliminate those traps and stand on personal accountability, everything is better. So here's where we challenge our corporate client. They want to train on customer service and selling skills and management skills. We tell them, no, let's start with personal accountability. Let's start with personal accountability before you do any other training. Because without accountability, I will fail.
So 3 traps: victim, blame, procrastinate. We want everyone to hear those. They're well articulated inside the book. Brilliant.
So what problems does QBQ solve? So,
yeah, you know, I put on Facebook the other day, I put on some, I forgot the exact wording, but as long as I'm not taking ownership for my problems, I will never solve my problems. That sounds obvious. But as long as anything I'm struggling with is someone else's fault, any problem I'm having, let's be practical. I'm at work and I'm not getting the raise I thought I deserved. I'm not getting promotion. I was passed over. Things aren't going the way I think. Well, the way I think they should. I can blame us. I can blame the corporate culture. I can blame my family at home for not supporting me. Or I can say, what can I do to grow, learn, and change? So it's interesting. Every problem I face in life, I mean, I am a husband of 40 years. I am a father to 7. I'm a grandfather to 12. We just had number 12 last month.
wow.
And often it's hard to keep count. And, every problem I face relationally as a husband, a father, and a grandfather, as a professional speaker and trainer, as a neighbor in my community, every problem I might face is going to be better apt and more easily solved if I say, well, what can I do to contribute to solving this problem, as opposed to venting, whining, blaming, and complaining about other people. So you can give me any problem. Now, here's the key. Not all problems are mine. And we talk a lot about that in the parenting book. No enabling allowed. You can't solve your kids' problems all the time, because you know what? They're going to grow up to be adults that are dependent on others. And that means we failed as a parent. So problems always begin with me working to contribute and solve that problem.
So tell us about this parenting book. You, your wife, Karen, you've written a parenting book. Tell us about that. Tell us about how it's being received, because I'm biased, of course. I think everyone should have it. I think it should be mandatory reading as soon as you enter into the institution of being a parent. But just tell us a little bit about that, John.
I think possibly as we continue to sell the book, there's some really challenging content in it. Something as simple. I've seen parents fight this. I'm a Cornell University graduate, if you've ever heard of Cornell. And my dad was Cornell wrestling coach for 26 years. So when your dad's a wrestling coach at Cornell, trust me, you don't go to Harvard. You go to Cornell. And recently I had the incredible honor to go back to Cornell after 40 years and teach the QBQ. So I did this session, and I got back to Denver, and the guy who had hired me to come speak at Cornell emailed me and said, the session went great. There was one person who objected. She didn't agree with your comment that my child is a product of my parenting. And I saw that comment and I thought, well, that's pretty normal. It's pretty human nature. See, at some point, a child's going to make their own choices. But if my child is into drugs, if my child can't maintain relationships, if my child is struggling in life, I think it's healthy for a parent to say, well, what could I have done differently as a parent? And what can I do now to support my child, as opposed to blaming the world, blaming the friends, blaming the government, blaming the schools. Anything I can do to be an accountable parent is healthy. But that's one theme in the book. My child's a product of my parenting. And we've seen some younger parents, they want to reject that notion. You know, Ben Franklin said, if it hurts, it instructs.
Right.
I think it hurts sometimes for moms and dads to say, my 9-year-old is acting out, not because he's naturally acting out, but because I have not parented in a strong, healthy manner. So in the book, we say things like, if you're having problems with your teenager, you probably had problems with your toddler. And that's another concept we see parents sometimes reject. Many will embrace it. But that's accountability, to really look in the mirror and say, wait a minute, my 15-year-old is acting out. It's not because all teenagers act out. That's a myth. Not all teenagers drink. Not all teenagers get into trouble. Not all teenagers talk back. That's an old phrase, talking back, okay? But not all teenagers do that. But what happens in the world today is parents see their teens acting out and they immediately say, well, that's a teenager. Now, wait a minute, mom, dad. If you're having problems with your teen, did you have problems with your toddler? You know, you guys are probably of the generation that watched the TV show called Charles in Charge. Well, guess what? Nowadays, there are families you could title Child in Charge.
Right.
You've got families with the kids completely running the show, usually through their emotions. Now, feelings are important, okay? No one's denying that. But you cannot let a child age 2, 4, or 16 run the family through their emotions. We must learn discipline. We must learn to behave in an adult-like manner. We're not really raising kids, are we, guys? We're raising adults.
Right.
But it does start with the child, and it does start with learning good practical skills of strong parenting. And sometimes you ask me how it's being received. Well, like a bell curve, we've got a lot of people who love the book, but you've always got some of those parents who say, well, I'm not going to do that. That's
right.
wrong. Well, what they're really rejecting, to be honest, is looking in the mirror.
Right. Absolutely. And with looking in the mirror, John, you know, you always say the cornerstone of accountability is the concept that I can only change me. And again, this is so relatable to what we're talking about, because everyone else wants to change everyone. Someone gets the book and goes, oh, this would be a great book for you. This would be a great book for someone else. This is a great message for someone else. You know, can you explain a little bit about that cornerstone and the fact that we can really only change ourselves?
Sure. It's interesting. I didn't invent the concept. It's not new, but as we say in the QBQ book, the old stuff is the good stuff. And at QBQ, we teach the old stuff. We teach personal responsibility, and we teach how to ask, what can I do to improve me today? Instead of saying, if only my wife would, if only my kids would listen, if only the coaches were fair, if only the schools would do blah, 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 if only the government would support me more. I mean, I can't change any of that. And parents, not really. You can't even change your children. Sure, you can put a 3-year-old in a timeout. You can guide them, shape them. You can mold them. But as they grow, we need to say, what can I do to be the best parent possible for my child at whatever stage he or she is at? Because I can't change others. I can only change me. I was doing a session years ago, and it was a group of CEOs from different companies, and one guy owned 400 Burger Kings. And I'll never forget what he said. He said, I'm going to take my son around the world. We're leaving next week. We're going to go on a 20-day trip. I said, wow, really? To spend time with your son? Because you love your son? Because you can't wait to be with your son? He said, well, yeah, but mostly I want to talk him into joining the family business. His only goal was to put his goal into the head of his son.
Right.
You know, I wasn't a very good wrestler. My dad, Jimmy Miller, was a champion wrestler. I was not very good. 7 guys, only one son. He was born in 88. I wanted him to be a wrestler, but I learned he wasn't going to be much of a wrestler when he came home from the second practice at a youth intramural wrestling tournament or group. He said, you know, Dad, the other boys are sweaty. I don't want to go back. So I just knew I didn't have a wrestler there. My son, Michael, became a drama star in high school. Now he runs his own business. He's a sales guy. He's an entrepreneur. They photograph and film weddings, he and his wife. The point is, I needed to ask, how can I support my son? Not what can I do to change my son?
Right.
So one last comment here. The number one takeaway from QBQ, there's a lot of good stuff in it, but if you interview people, they'll say, well, I have to admit, I've been trying to change my spouse, my teenage son, my boss, my staff. It didn't really occur to me to take to heart the QBQ message of, what can I do to change me? So for managers, here's a good example. Instead of asking, why aren't my people motivated? When are we going to find good people? Why don't they care as much as I care? The manager should be asking, how can I become a better coach for my staff today? What can I do to learn new management skills? We could talk an hour about that. Most managers are highly untrained people. They got the job because they were promoted, because they did something skillfully. Now they're suddenly managing 7 other people, have never received people management training. And I can say that with confidence because I sold training for managers for a decade. The most untrained group in the business world is the people manager. So learn to, how can I be a better coach? Stop trying to change your team.
Right. Brilliant.
Wow. So John, you seem like a big family man. I want to take this example and use it with my family. I see you and your daughter, Christian, she's also your co-speaker with you. You have recently created the QQQ Workbook. Well,
Yep.
Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, this is actually Penguin Random House came to us and asked us to create this. We have a full training system that we license to our clients and they use in-house. That's a different subject. But Penguin said, we're sensing people want more than just a book. They want to be able to take the book, QBQ, break it down into segments, have challenging questions asked. They want to study the book. And you guys are learners, so you understand this, you get this. There are people who read a book once and put it down. Then there are the learners who read a book once, and they notice on the last page, John Miller said, read the book again. And then they read the book again. And then they read the book a third time. That's when they start to grasp the content. And that's all this became. The workbook just became like an extra tool, a personal self-help tool to help people take that material of QBQ and flipping the switch. This is the companion book to QBQ. Take that material deeper. So I'm proud of Kristen. She's getting old. She's pushing 38. And she's been with me. Get this, guys. She's been with me since 2008. I hired her at age 25 to go around the country speaking, and she has done so many now. We're in the United States now. I've spoken professionally in 49 states. I've been to Hawaii, but never spoken there professionally. Kristen has been to 42 states to speak. She's trying to catch me.
That's awesome.
So there's 2 speakers at QBQ, and when you have your daughter on your team and she stays with you for 12 years, you either know you're paying her too much or you're doing something right.
Yeah, good for you. That's fantastic.
So that's really interesting. So I'm just thinking, is your kids basically a big part of why you came up with these books for them, or like why did you write Outstanding? And
well, the Outstanding book is a little bit off the beaten path. It's not QBQ. It's not personal accountability. I'm going to tell you what it is, gentlemen. It's 47 observations I've made of the best companies as I've called on organizations since 1986. I mean, the best companies are into forgiveness between departments instead of grudge holding. The best companies have managers who coach in the moment, not once a year at the performance review. The best companies help their employees understand why organization exists, 12 words or less, the mission. So there's all these things that I had in my head that I think the most outstanding firms do. And that's what that book is. It's a collection of 47 ideas that the best companies engage in. And that's why we wrote it.
Fantastic. So what does it take for a person or organization, John, to be outstanding?
Well, I guess we'd start with personal accountability, wouldn't we, Matt?
It makes sense.
I am convinced, as I've interviewed managers over the years, they're not saying people shouldn't make mistakes. They're saying they just want people to own up and say, what can I do to learn? And of course, the manager needs the same message. We say in the book, you will never, you being, corporate you, me, I will never learn from my mistakes until I admit they're mine. If I don't admit that mistake is mine, if I don't own that mistake, what will I do to change me? How will I learn, grow, and change from that mistake? So it all begins with leadership. So when you talk to managers, let's just say we're not focusing on the manager improving right now. And you say, what's great about well, they really take accountability for their results. They own their jobs.
Right.
They own their results. So the first step to being outstanding is stopping these questions.
Right. So, and if people take one idea, because you've got so many concepts, if people take one idea from your content, what would you hope that would be?
Well, we've already spoken about it, Matt, and it all comes back to somebody walks away from the book or the training session or hearing Kristen or me speak, and they go, I've been trying to fix others. That will work on me. I always laugh about the managers who buy the book for everybody else. And we've had managers give the book out. Basically, they're helping. They think they're helping. They think they're helping people by trying to change them. No, you'd be much better off using your time and energy changing yourself.
Beauty.
So I understand Dave Ramsey, the personal finance author and radio host, requires his staff to read QQQ and often recommends it to his listeners.
Yes.
Why do you think this is?
Well, this all began, if anybody knows Dave Ramsey, I don't know how well known he is up in your world, in Canada. Your broadcast, I'm sure, goes all across the world. But down here, he's gotten quite famous, quite big. But back in 2002, he wasn't quite that big. And he had an intern called me one day and said, Dave Ramsey would like to have you on his show. And I remember saying, Dave who? Dave Ramsey. Well, it turned out he had bought the original edition of the QQQ book in the Memphis bookstore. And he read half it there because it's a quick read. He later told me he felt so guilty reading half of it for free. He decided so he bought it and took it back to his organization. And it became a mainstay. At that time, he did not have required books for his staff. Well, a few years later, he made QQQ the first book people had to read when they joined his company. I'm sure other than Dave's books. And then now he's got like 5 or 6, but QQQ was the original book. And here's why. As we've discussed, everything begins and ends with personal accountability.
For sure.
But he recommends it to his listeners because if you can't manage your finances, you can't manage your money without personal accountability. Otherwise, you're going to blame the culture that requires you to buy and get that car. They take the time to know where their money's coming from, where their money's going. They're on top of it. They're bothering to bother. That's accountability.
Got it. Unbelievable.
Go ahead.
So John, you must get thousands of emails from readers. What do they tend to tell you? Like
they say, call Coach Daryl. We got an email just yesterday. Yeah, we got an email just yesterday from a client who's using us now, and turned out he had received the book in 2001 from his mentor, and he said that it totally changed his world. It totally changed his view of his family, his friends, the way he works, his career, everything. Personal accountability made a difference in his life. So now he's with a new company in Kentucky, a gas and pipeline company, and he all of a sudden says, you know what? I'm brand new here. They're having some problems. I need to bring in QQQ. So he gets a hold of us, and now he's using Kristen on virtual training. That's what we hear about QQQ is it sticks with people. Sure, there's specifics. Like, hey, my marriage has been struggling. I'm applying the QQQ here. It's much better now. Or I've been really hard on my son lately, and I decided to ask him, what can I do to be a better dad for you? But the number one message I think we get from emails, from people that send us emails, is how long the QBQ sticks with them and how much they use it in every area of their life. You know, you all know what an English muffin is, and an English muffin has nooks and crannies, and that butter seeps into those nooks and crannies and nothing's better. Well, QBQ seeps into the nooks and crannies of our life. There's no part of my life where I can't practice personal accountability. And that's the kind of message we get from our customers, people I've never met, our readers, that it stays with them.
Yeah, damn right it does, John. I mean, we always used to say QBQ, 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 and just use that as the buzzword to hold ourselves accountable every time we saw somebody, you know, veering off script and looking to blame someone else.
Good,
listen,
thank you.
This has been amazing. John G. Miller, Kristen Miller, author of QBQ, The Question Behind the Question, author of Flipping the Switch, and outstanding 47 Ways to Make Your Organizations Exceptional. John, how do people connect with you because they need to?
Well, it's funny, Matt, when I get that question, I always think 20 years ago when I did interviews, and they were always on the phone back then, radio interviews, we'd give out an 800 number and maybe a mailing address, you know. It's pretty simple nowadays, QBQ.com. You want to connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, whatever, just come to QBQ.com. We do have books for sale there. Our blog is right on the front page, so you can read what we're thinking, QBQ.com.
John, this has been one of the most entertaining and enlightening podcasts that we've done. Thank you so much. You know, it's one thing to just have somebody on the podcast that you don't know, that you don't have any history with. It's a total different thing to having used your tools and validate exactly everything that you're saying and then speak to the person that did it. So thank you so much for giving up your time. We know you're busy. We know a lot of people want a piece of you. So thank you so much for giving us your time. Daryl, any closing comments?
Thank you.
Don, again, if there's one book that you have to read, it's QBQ. Again, it changed my life, and I thank you, Matt, for introducing it to me, because it changed the way I dealt with my friends, my family, and I got to take a deeper dive again. I got to revisit it now and figure out how to deal with my kids. How do I? And in our programs about quality experiences, coaches, parents, get on board. On that note, thank you, John. Just go play, everyone. Just go play.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.